Okay.
Hans-Gerd Fischer. It's been a long association, and it started surprisingly in the 70s when you met my father. So what we would like to explore is that first coming together with Transfield. What was the first relationship, and then where did it go to? I mean, it was one thing meeting as a contractor and customer.
Perhaps we'd have to step back a few years before that. I joined Krupp in Germany in 1968. And the initial engagement for the first 6 years was the project management of a huge integrated steelworks plant in northern Spain. And that took its natural course. It eventually completed, and Krupp then asked me to join the business of Krupp in Australia. That was in late 73. So I traveled to Australia, joined Krupp Australia, which actually lived at 77 Pacific Highway. And as everybody knows, that is about 100 meters away from the Transfield office in Arthur Street. So the managing director of Krupp, Detlef Kramer, one of the first things which we did is we visited Transfield and Franco. We at that time had an opportunity to tender for dredgers for the State Electricity Commission in Victoria for their lignite open cuts. Dredgers, continuous mining machines, were relatively new to the construction industry. But what happened at the time is, and that sort of emphasized the need for getting more engagement in Australia, is that the government insisted in greater local contents. And Transfield was at the time already on the forefront of construction initiatives which got them into a skill base which was much more than simply fabricating steel for building projects. And therefore, Transfield succeeded in being our main contractor on this job. We succeeded, and Transfield succeeded. And through the late 70s and early 80s, we were heavily engaged with Transfield in building the machines for the Latrobe Valley. It was interesting at that time. Your father was already pointing to the special quality of these machineries and saying it is space age construction. It is space age design, space age engineering. Nevertheless, Transfield succeeded brilliantly in doing very difficult work, combination of fabrication and machining work. And so we stayed close. We had our difficulties, as one would have as a main contractor and a subcontractor.
That's unusual.
But these difficulties are there to be overcome. For me, it was in many ways a very new situation. At the time, the strength of the union organized labor. I remember that we had to put a Sun Herald onto the floor to count the raindrops.
That's right.
In a matter of a minute to see if the labor can walk off the site or not. Anyway, that relationship continued, but in parallel, Krupp's fortunes in Australia took a turn in the way that the mining materials handling sector was reaching a point of what do you call it, satisfaction, or a point of saturation.
Saturation.
Similar to power stations not being built anymore, so there was no big request for mining materials handling. And Transfield looked at the opportunities around, and at that point in time, the governments introduced yet another hurdle to make business in Australia. They wanted not only get the engineering, not only get the fabrication, not only get the implementation of the project and the services, but they also wanted to get the money. And that introduced the build, own, operate style project delivery. And that was a point in time when I thought, this is too interesting to not to be engaged with. And I applied with Marco and Paul Salteri for the job in the project development side, and then shortly after I joined you.
In '89.
That was
90. So
that
this
was-
is
that
an
was-
extraordinary,
that was great.
journey. So look, that was fascinating. Let me also put some context around these wonderful projects before we move on to some other subjects. These bucket wheel dredgers were leviathan of machines. Until you actually visibly see them and physically climb aboard them, you don't realise the scale of these bucket wheel dredgers. They were, of course, digging up a combination of the topsoil and the overburden before they got to the lignite underneath. And each one of these bucket wheels would it take, I don't know, probably 10 tonnes on their own, and then you had one under the other was on a round thing that was just chop, 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 chop. And then, you know, you'd have these extraordinary scales. So we had a very challenging job of actually putting together these complicated machines, which had fabrication, but very precise fabrication with machining to actually get the tolerances right.
Correct.
And this is a skill that Transfield had already, not mastered is probably too strong a word, but had good capability in. But I think these projects that came through Krupp, your employer at the time, pushed Transfield into a new area of capability, which was very useful. So that's just for the listener, just to get a sense of where it took the company and our fabrication. And we were fabricating a lot of that in Seven Hills in Sydney, and the projects were in the Latrobe Valley.
And shifted it down.
So we had to ship all this stuff down, and that was quite an extraordinary logistical thing alone.
Correct.
So, but Hans, I'm interested in, you mentioned that you joined Krupp in '68, you spent a number of years with them and delivered a project in Spain. But what was the connectivity between why they asked you to come to Australia as opposed to somebody else? How did that happen?
Okay, well, the Spanish activity of Krupp was one of the last integrated steelworks plants they ever built. And so that division of Krupp was then closed down eventually over years. And it was already foreshadowed. That means that they put me then into the mining materials handling division.
Right. Okay.
As deliverer of projects, fundamentally. And it included very early the tough negotiations. It included very early the assembly of a lineup of contractors, negotiation of the contracts, etc., etc. And that got me eventually then also into this Transfield mold. And very easy to apply when we then did the build and operate projects which followed.
So interesting, yeah. Okay, so let's now jump forward again. So you came and joined my team, which Marco had asked me to set up in 1989, and I was running just prior to that for the previous 4 to 5 years, the construction division in Brisbane. So we had quite a healthy business going up there. But with my own background, having really understood the language of financial engineering, having done a master's in business administration, Marco felt that the work I was doing in Brisbane, which was the precursor of a lot of these build, own and operate projects that we did here in Sydney, all sort of run out of our Sydney office, we needed to build a team. So when I came back from Brisbane to Sydney, I set up this team. And one of the early recruits is also David Iverack.
Correct.
Yourself.
And I met David, of course, in the first instance.
In the first instances. And Jeff Rice was another
Jeff Rice was there, exactly.
Then they were there, and there were many others, of course. So Chris Bland it wasn't long before Chris Bland joined us.
Yeah, exactly.
Glenn Fraser came into the team. So, you know, we built up a pretty big team. In fact, at one stage, we were we were definitely the biggest developer of build, own and operate projects in the country.
And the most skillful.
And skillful.
And that expressed itself on a number of occasions. First of all, I must say all of those people who you just mentioned had a very long-term relationship with Transfield. And it is a great credit to yourself and to the organization to find it attractive for those people. They were all highly skilled. If they work on the legal side, if they work on the commercial side, or on the contractual side, or on the doing side, and it was really a great credit. And I haven't seen that kind of stability in an organization very often. And in particular in Australia, where I learned job hopping is not bad, it is just normal. In Germany it wouldn't be. In Germany you do actually what you did here and kept the people for
well,
long
we
term.
had, I think the secret there, Hans, was that firstly it was a good team, we had good people.
Yeah.
Secondly, we had a very exciting area we were working in this project development. Thirdly, we were successful.
Exactly.
You know, we actually only won 1 in 3 projects that we developed. But that rate of winning was actually it was certainly enough to justify it and actually ended up being quite a profitable activity for the company.
But also, you could rely on an enormous amount of support of those agencies on the sideline, which are very important: lawyers, legal firms,
that's right,
banks for funding.
Yeah.
So we lined them up in a way which I think was quite novel in the early 90s for them to experience. And I do realize very vividly that a lot of these officers of those agencies, like law firms and whatever, did it for their first time. They learned a lot from us. By the time, remember, we had done the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, we came into MacArthur water treatment plant.
That's right.
I think that was the first one.
And
Yan Yean, and they were small enough to test the whole framework of contractual documentation for which there was no real precedence.
That's right.
And we could engage the banks to work with us to develop this documentation, which then helped us for the next job and helped us for the next job. So it was quite a uplift.
As you say, this was the formative years of project development, build, own and operate in the Australian market. And remember that Australia led the world. This was not.
Correct.
This was an unusual contractual framework to actually go about building major infrastructure projects, mainly for the governments of the world and Australia. And Australia really won many years in a row the deals of the year. I remember reading about it, and then of course the whole industry's taken off, and Australia is only just part of it now. But we were certainly the forerunners, and it was a very exciting period. And you think,
I mean, in that sense, we always did the hard work, but the banks took the Deal of the Year award.
That's right. They got the award.
Like Macquarie Bank.
Well, I was going to say here's the situation. The Melbourne City Link, which is a very big project, which we initiated, and Tony Shepherd was really probably the main driver of the project. But it started. Our work started well into the early 90s on the Melbourne City Link, and we did not enter into a contract until 95, 96. That deal, at that time when we listed Transurban, which was called the vehicle that we used to do this project, when we listed it, we had quite an unusual arrangement with the customer. So the government basically handed the concession to Transurban to actually collect the tolls, and we had the biggest problem we thought was going to get the electronic tolling. This was only the second electronic tolling in the world, not in Australia, in the world. And so we had to convert a whole city to actually using tags.
Lifeline to our return.
And I remember when we listed it, we were short about $20 million. We were trying to raise, what was a big number? It was 500, I think, of which Obayashi and ourselves took 10% of it. Leaving that aside, I remember going to see Alan Moss at Macquarie Bank, who was the CEO at the time, and begging him to help fill the equity, because without the equity being filled before we went to the listing, we would never get the project away. And we felt it was so important because they were our advisors, and they should be confident about the models that they actually had developed, which had an 18% IRR. Internal rate of return. These were extraordinary times, and we still had trouble finding the equity.
And he didn't.
Then he did. They did. But no sooner had it been listed, and this is the point I wanted to make, they sold out of it. And then about a year later, they realised internally that they wanted to create the whole MIG, Macquarie Infrastructure Group, and they bought back in at about 3 times the price that they sold out at. That made a lot of money because it continued to go up. in value. So, and these are heady days.
They're very heady days. And
days.
then, of course, you didn't stop there. You looked over the boundaries of our immediate access and influence, and got involved in Thailand.
Yeah.
And if there was any project who had a long gestation, then it was the Thai project, because while we were initially very successful, and again, you know, it's a credit to Transfield, the level of credibility Transfield had at the time brought in a Electricité de France who took 40% of the project, Transfield had 20%, and then 3 Thai partners shared the rest of it. And Transfield had the project management position.
Yeah,
they had the lead role. And it was an amazing situation to work in Thailand. And I then went to Bangkok and Vientiane. We had 2 offices there. And it was very amazing to work with a team of French, Thai people, and of course our own people. And again, it was quite interesting to see how credible we appeared as far as the banks were concerned. We got a lot of support initially from a consortium of banks involving Deutsche Bank, for example, and others. And that progressed the negotiation also with EGAT, the Electricity Generation Authority in Thailand, and of course with the Laotian government, because the project was in Laos, to deliver and to earn external currency for Laos by selling electricity into Thailand. It was an amazing thing. And then, of course, Laos, without any own balance sheet, required World Bank support.
That's right.
And so there was a number of pilgrimages to the World Bank, and the World Bank was very supportive.
In Washington,
yeah, they were of course keen that Laos, and actually they were sort of quasi a promoter for the project, but it coincided with the damming activity of do-gooders by saying the World Bank should not get involved in building dams.
That's right.
Remember that?
Yeah, I
remember that
very clearly.
Created a vacuum.
Yeah.
And before that dilemma was overcome and the World Bank was then standing up again, I think it was another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Eventually the project came to bear, I think, in 2008 or 2009.
Yeah.
So at a very late stage.
Yeah.
But it just shows what the stamina of Transfield is.
That's right.
In order to keep their teeth into these initiatives.
As you say, it was one of the longest development projects we'd been involved in. We first saw John McGarry actually did.
Yeah.
He went to a World Bank and international lenders consortium meeting, and found that this project was available in Laos, a 900 megawatt power station on the Nakai Plateau, which was in Laos. And this was a big project at anybody's scale because of the height. This Nakai Plateau is 500 metres above the Mekong, and so it drained the water into the Mekong. So it's an extraordinary project. But in 92 or 93, John brought this to us.
Yeah.
We were still in the fledgling days of Transfield project development.
Yeah.
We then spent the next 7 or 8 years on this, and we're still nowhere near having concluded the development phase. So.
Correct.
Because of all the changes that happened in Transfield, we decided to step back from it, and we actually sold our position to the French and the Thais, and recovered our investment. I could not believe it. We actually recovered our investment in the development phase in the sale of our development rights to the others. And that project then did get completed around 2008-9, but it had more than a 14-year gestation period. 14 years.
Gestation period, exactly.
So it was. You need to have a long stamina.
Long stamina and deep pockets to get through that period. But in the meantime, of course, there were other things. There were the rail links, Brisbane, from the central station to the airport. There was a rail link here in.
New Southern Railway and Airlink. What was it called up in AirTrain?
AirTrain
in Brisbane.
In Brisbane. They were good projects. And then, of course, the government decided more initiative of private sector offering outsourcing opportunities. And one of them was Yara Trams. Now, I must say, in many of these projects, we were very fortunate to work with the right partners. And tram business wasn't really a core business of Transfield.
No, that would be a modest description.
It was perhaps a service component, but not the running of the business. So we teamed up with a French company, and that was very lucrative. And we secured a 10-year assignment for running and maintaining the trams in
half the trams. I think it was half the tram network we ran in Melbourne. It wasn't a full tram network, I think.
I thought it was a full.
It might have been a full trams. Okay. But it was. I'm sorry, I'm confusing with the Melbourne Water project where we had a third of their network. That's right. Yes, but the trams were, as we all know in Melbourne, a very iconic element of the transportation network. And that, as you say, it was a very good relationship with Transdev, which was a French company, unusually having a similar prefix, if you like, to their name as Transfield, Transdev. But that was a very good contract. It went for many years, and eventually Transfield Services lost it to Downer, I think, one of our competitors a few years ago.
But what it also showed is that the services element became more and more important, because all of these build and operate projects had this operate component in it. So we had to associate ourselves with the capability development of a services company doing services. And that led then to saying, okay, well, if that's the case, then let's do it properly. Let's put it as a separate entity up, and Transfield Services developed. So it was a very good combination of securing opportunities and then letting them go down the service path for Transfield Services to excel. And then I think the next big break came. I'm not going into all of the restructuring and whatever the personnel developments here, but the next big change came when Transfield decided to do something about renewable energy. And that was a notion which sort of developed to gain pace in the early 2000s.
Yeah, that's right.
Initially with things like biodiesel.
Correct.
That was
our first foray, if you like, into renewable energy, and then solar heat and power was our next
solar heat and power, and from that then the desire to line up with a company which has already done the engineering development, and we found such company in Germany, Novatec. It was an existing company. The shareholders. The existing shareholders wanted to have a change, and they offered Transfield the majority of the shares. And at the time, that was negotiated 2007, sounded perfect. At that time, the signals all over the world were solar power, renewable energy, long-term targets, and it was the right thing to do. What then, of course, happened was the global financial crisis shortly after. And that hit the whole industry. But what it does also, it changed government's attitudes to the business, in particular the US, who were a very vocal supporter of that, and saying, okay, well, we can do other things like refraction or other things to compensate. And it was then a very difficult path, I think, fair to say, Guido. We took the opportunity of the which the Spanish government provided, and succeeded in a 30 megawatt project, which we subsequently built with a fairly new technology, on the steam generation, and so it had its ups and downs.
Well, it started, as you say, with great promise of Novatec Solar, and we thought it was the right thing to do, and we decided to invest in it. What we didn't realise was what was going to be the impact of the global financial crisis, but as much that plus the fact that our main competitor, which we didn't rate as a competitor of any great nature, was photovoltaic PV. Their cost curve came down manyfold. It must have been 5, 6 or 10 times the original cost. They were more expensive than us significantly when we invested in Novatec.
And convincingly so, because we couldn't see that there was because they were already long-term in the playing field.
That's right.
They kept the price level at a very high level, as it turns out.
And we thought, well, they'll have a declining cost curve, but not at any rate. They shouldn't be able to match or accelerate past our cost curve reduction, which was a wrong, in the end proved to be a completely wrong assumption. Yeah. But look, we tried very hard. We made, we employed a lot of people. We built a very successful project, which is still operating today. It was the first commercial project of its nature. Our competitors, who were in the linear Fresnel area, certainly have never managed to achieve what we did. And the parabolic trough, which is our main competitor in the solar heating side, they had a very mature product and there wasn't a huge amount of reduction in there. So all of those businesses have pretty well gone out of business as well. But ours, eventually, we just couldn't find a way to actually tap into the new markets. And there were more markets than just electricity generation, as you remember, Hans. It was also about generating steam in recovering oil, for example. Enhanced oil recovery was what it was called. And so a lot of the big oil majors are injecting steam into the ground to help extract more oil. And we had, I think, and still had through Novatec, a technology which was compatible, but we never were able to market it and succeed there, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, looking forward, I guess it's a pause in government engagement. You see here in Australia there is a very huge outcry in supporting new technologies in the area of energy savings and renewable energy, and there are funds available for that. So in the long term, I think it will catch on again. It's a very interesting combination of traditional generation technology, turbine generator, combined with a new mode of steam generation through the solar field. And that has enormous applications in the power industry, as you say. Then when you then take the steam itself, wherever steam is required and wherever sun is there, it will have got a position. And I would be surprised if industries move to those areas. So, and I think Southern Europe has got a bright outlook if they just get their historic act together.
I don't think we're going to see that in a hurry, particularly the way Greece is going and towards its Brexit.
But North Africa, for example, those efforts were made, but I think we
didn't quite get there. No, because there's a lot of the world which is very suited for this technology.
Yeah, exactly. But the political systems don't seem to really follow suit.
No, but Hans, I think there is still a chance that in the years to come there will be the utilisation of these sort of technologies as people look at other solutions. But look, so the Novatec was a very big chapter for you. It took up a good 7 years of your time. It was wonderful to have a German national actually who worked with us to actually help us through this period, and that was a very important contribution that you made to us, Hans. That the knowledge of how things worked in Germany and in Germany was very, very beneficial. And notwithstanding all the difficulties we had, I think you had a very interesting time over there. Personally, you went back to revisit your motherland.
After these 30 odd years.
30 years in Australia. And
yeah.
of course, you had a son who was still living in Germany, so you've been able to catch up with him. So from you,
and that benefit is still going. We have a second place there.
Yeah.
You know, my family is still here, the majority of the family, but the desire to visit is great, and at Christmas they are all coming over.
It's good.
And even the christening of the new one will be done in Germany. So I'm very happy to have achieved that dual existence. And as far as Transfield is concerned, well, this doesn't go without getting terribly hurt. You know, those kind of changes influenced by extraneous circumstances. And you guys have taken your own position in looking into the future. And for that, I think I wish you really all the best and great fortunes, because you deserve it. You have got the experience, you have got the far vision, and you surely can apply it to things which you really like and enjoy. So
Hans, that's very kind of you to say that. Yeah, and certainly we will. You know, the journey that I've had, fortunately, following the wonderful creation of my father with the tremendous assistance of his partner, Carlos Salteri, to create what was a really unique company in this country. In, you know, post-war, setting up capabilities, employing thousands of people, bringing to Australia many immigrants, mainly from Italy and then from, you know, Southern Europe and other places. You know, when you think about the contribution that Transfield as a company has made to this country, it's significant. You know, the projects that we've left, testament to the capability of the company. You know, very complicated projects that have been delivered in, you know, difficult circumstances, and sometimes, when I say difficult, both politically difficult, sometimes engineering difficult, because, you know, when you're building a cross-city tunnel, for example, here in Sydney, you know, these are very complex projects. But you know, I think with Transfield is one of these places where, you know, it's a bit like the Hotel California thing. You know, you can check out, but you can never leave.
Yeah.
In the sense that you have always an embedded part of you is so fondly connected to the company, and I feel the same, even though I've, of course, come from the founder's side as an employee. I mean, I started my own work. I've had a complete career in Transfield. I've done nothing else but work in Transfield all my life. So to embark on a new journey now, with the benefit of all the years of experience of Transfield, is going to be a very, very interesting one.
That's right. Yep. No, I think there has been a footprint in the place, and Australia, unfortunately, not like Europe, doesn't offer the continuity in particular skill sets which are being developed. Like, take the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, and there is no other Sydney Harbour Tunnel. There is no other opportunity to build a tunnel in Australia of that type. Take power stations. The great settlement of expertise through the 80s and 90s, and now it retreats. So you know, there's no opportunity to build a new power station as yet.
But there will be new challenges.
And the industry, and that's the challenge for the industry, has to take that into account. So there will be natural movements. There will be a breathing space. People will come in to deliver a particular skill set, and they fade out again. And I'm still concerned that we get a lot of more mechanical engineering capability
in this country.
Yeah.
Well, it is. It's quite interesting. I mean, in this new chapter, I've been seeing some companies working in the mineral support, mining and support area, the coal industry in particular. And there's tremendous capability still available and necessary in the country. I mean, you can't build or repair a bucket or a shovel or a
Without
tray. You can't send it to Taiwan or to somewhere, you know.
Correct. You
You've
have
got
to
to
have
do it in right next door to where
and
the
use
mine
that
is.
as a nucleus to
create services,
create
and so
more.
those mining companies do have that service capability right next door.
You know, I always felt that the advantage I personally had by Transfield, the advantage was being asked to do different things. You know, we mentioned Thailand, we mentioned Brisbane, we mentioned a project, you know, in other constituency, but the one which also sticks out is the initiative on campus living. Eventually Transfield decided to get stuck into student accommodation. Student accommodation is a lifeline to universities and very, very important. And therefore, to take over from a private sector, student accommodation is just like chopping off a finger of the university. Therefore, the concerns and the hesitations which we received when we started negotiation were quite substantial. And again, I mean, it is sort of to the credit of Transfield to master the level of convincement and conviction which overcame these trepidations the universities had. And we could, through the actual performance, and convince that this is a very solid proposal to have the private sector operate university accommodations, student accommodation.
As you will.
A very important conviction, and that led then to an explosion of opportunities, not only in Australia but also in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And where New Zealand is even more isolated and more concerned that, you know, the good name of a university, which also hinges on student accommodation available, etc., could be tainted. And of course America, which is always and has always been a very difficult market.
Yeah.
So that was a great experience.
It is. So Hans, let me add to that, because you've touched on a number of really important things. You know, this idea that universities, so the model of campus living villages was mainly to actually exist on the campus, on the actual land of the university, as opposed to doing a freehold thing across the road. Although some of our assets did include freehold properties, the vast bulk of them were actually on the university land, and we had like a concession, and this is why Luca and I liked this business so much. It actually was very similar to the work we did in Transfield project development in the 80s and 90s, and that was about getting a concession to actually house these children, charge them you know, the fare, if the toll, if you like, which is in the way of their accommodation cost, build a facility that would last and be dedicated and designed around the needs of the students, and make sure that the university felt that the work we were doing in looking after and doing the transition between the student at school to university was held and handled as well as possible. Because one of the issues that we identified early on, and then campus living then developed internally, was this live, learn and grow program, which was not just about giving a kid a key and a room, but actually having a whole series of programs that helped them adjust from school to university. And when they were in university, if they had the problems with their studying and learning, we would help them figure out how to do that. And so we would be engaged with the university, with their personnel and ours, and actually put some programs in place within the university accommodation. Now, that happened all around the world. We did this in many places. But I think the really exciting thing about campus living villages is that it started with an idea with the two Davids, as you remember, where we just joined with them for half of 650 beds. That was where the concept started. We ended up, when we finally sold out of campus living villages last year, that they were managing 45,000 beds. So it just shows you the way you could scale the business up. So we won't go into all of the details about how that was done, because actually I spoke to Nick James, who I have to say was the father of the next stage of campus living villages, which was bringing in the institutional investors to actually give us the appropriate horsepower financially to build the business beyond where we got it to ourselves, which was quite a big business. I mean, we had 25,000 beds on our own balance sheet at one stage before we brought in the institutions to help us to grow to double that size. So, you know, it was an extraordinary journey. The universities, I think, appreciated it. Those are the thinking ones, and we had a lot of interaction with the vice chancellors and even the chancellors, some of whom we knew. I mean, you know, like Fred Hilmer and David Gonski. They at New South Wales University, we built a beautiful facility there for 1,100 students, and it's much loved. It's dense, but it works very well.
Yeah, it is at the heart of the interest of the university to have a good call on student accommodation. Yeah. So that it could be identified with and followed by the students accordingly.
Yeah.
No, I think that was a very good initiative, and it shows really it's a good example for the cycle. You know, the building up of the business. We have been so successful that universities came to us.
They did in the early days. We
were and
the
saying,
rage.
Can you
do this for us?
This for us? Can you take it off our hands? We developed the systems. Yeah. We developed the regulations for the students. And that all, you know, was very convincing. So it was quite an interesting excursion into a different type of activity, which also demonstrated the ability of Transfield to seek out opportunities which are not necessarily in the straight line. They are a little bit to the left or to the right, and make something very good out of it. Yeah. It's a very good example.
Yeah, that's right. So I think with that, Hans, it just showed the flexibility of the company to also make a step in another direction that looks very different, but in fact wasn't so far from our core skills of that build, own, operate. I mean, you know, that skill for the university was, you know, they gave us the concession to build the facility. We built it. We either paid them an upfront fee or we gave them a lease, a land lease every year. And then we basically ran this for 20 or 30 or 40 years. And this was no different from a tollway concession, no different from a power station concession, no different from a railway concession. You know, these are the very similar sort of structural things.
Clientele, you could say, is a little bit more visible than the car driver.
Yeah, so instead of having a toll, you know, we have the kids paying us their lease every week. So I think, you know, this is just again summarising the tremendous flexibility of the company, and we'll see what the next chapter brings.
Well, again, I mean, we all are in support of, and when I go through the rooms down at Campus Living, I still meet Chris Bland. Yeah. I still meet Rolf de Kwaal.
That's right.
And Gabelich,
Richard Gabelich, that's right.
So it does show us that people just can't let their hands off. So you continue to have wonderful support, Guido. You just have to call it, call it up.
Call the favours in, and they'll all come. All right. So thank you, Hans, very much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity
to reminisce.
Yeah, lovely.